Keo number, Kusha number, Kokansang. Then Tiri Karsana Tau Leba Shila, then Neba Yongje, then number to the Yando, Yedichon, the Narang, the Sanan, the Karochimuchon. Karsana Nima Deba Numba de la Denu Yamare, then Matu Kamo Mamoji, the Yanu Yamare. Then we are washing it out and the James, which have on the dead washing it. She came back again. Yamate. They did the didn't debate later, but they are thing of the equipment, Teta Toba, the garden jet in the Majima, near to the.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Also, my fellow speakers, scholars. I'm so happy to be here today. This is my first trip to United States. Although I have many friends, especially I know Jim Smith, I'm very happy to see him here today. And thanks to Trace Foundation support, I'm able to participate in this language seminar, and I'm so happy to share my works with you.
Today, around the Yongsa, the Congo Jason to begin to Yongla. The Tejay and the Shuato. The big decay, they don't go the legacy to the Shui.
I came from Beijing, the capital of China, and therefore I thought it would be good if I could share with you some of the works that we have carried out toward the standardization of Tibetan language.
The Jungo La China, the Miri Natunga Duya, Miri Natunga Duna, Tangyum, Miri Natunga. Miri Natunga, Miri Natunga, soon the social gay, getcha. Then the Dina Mrini, Manju the Kachi, the Huizu Serva, Konin the Jacquet Peju Tamir. Dina Manju Koran the Yigay, the Jacquet Pejin Yamar. Then the Meg Miri Nishu Zaguda than the Tarum, Gay Bama, Yigay, then it to Tungi the Tangyum Rig, the Gay.
As you know, that China has 56 nationalities, and among them 55 minority nationalities. And if you look at the language situation among the nationalities, you would see that 53 of them have a language, and among them the Hui and the Manchus, they use Chinese these days. And then if you look at the other nationalities, 29 of the nationalities have both spoken and written language.
The Congo Chasha, the Miri, the Legend, the Gate, the Get the one kid, the Jacob, Zatin, Zatin on there, the Miri Sakun, Rongjongi, Zatin, the Miri Sakun, Rongjongi Jatin, the Ninja on the Miri, so sweet, the Get the Yigay Bejuan around US, and the Tembe Suyer.
Because the nationalities and they're living in China, the Constitution of China also upheld the right to use the nationalities' language in their respective autonomous region, and you would see this both in Constitution as well as the regional laws. For the implementation and the usage of the minority language in their own regions.
The Jatin, the Jatin, so the English to Lali, that said that Miri, Yige, Union from Miri, the Sajaka Tamana, then the San Jorda, then Tarungu, Tatanian Ching, then Jamga Kunda, Pedro Kanda, Tamana de Yuri, Yige Union.
Because of these constitutional, I think, standards and also the regional laws, you would see the nationalities are using their respective language for, let's say, the newspapers, television, broadcasting, as well as publications. You would see these different languages in the print as well.
Gay, the gay Teddy, a default in the Narange, then the social taxi,
Therefore, since we are discussing on the standardization of language for this seminar, I wanted to share with you the works that we have carried out in China toward the standardization of Tibetan language. So I wanted to really touch on the two main points regarding the standardization of the language. First of all, I wanted to look at the standardization of the dialect, the importance of the standardization of the dialect, the Tibetan dialect. And the second is the standardization of the terminologies. And I feel these two points are really important toward the standardization of Tibetan language. Pronunciation, the standardization of the pronunciation.
La patuni kecha de dan koda trigger ma la ji yerwa la patuni de keda de koda trigger ma de ngima patun dewa se shira yue ma ba de je du ke ko ma ko je ko ra he chim shira yue ma ta ding sang patui di nga du no wi kan so mi na ra de ne lungba de to mi cha ma de ne ga sa ga le ro ge yue ba de ne nga du lungba mi to sa sa le ne ko de an do da kang ge ne ko ro nge de ne patu da chong jiao nge So, as
you would know, that there are three main dialects in Tibetan language: the Kham and Uysan, the Kham and the central region. And although these are the kind of three main dialects, we would also see different dialects among the subgroups. As a Tibetan saying going, that each region has its own language and each Lama has its own teaching. And this saying basically reflects the reality of the diversity in the language in Tibetan community. As you know, that the Tibetan community is mainly the farming areas, or the agricultural communities. And as a result, even between neighboring villages, you would see the diversity in their way of speaking. And as a result, these days, especially when there's a lot of interaction needed for trade and other purposes, one of the difficulties is the understanding through a common pronunciation. And this it's become a pressing reality these days for many of the travelers, people who need to communicate outside of their community.
Bög keba in Ranga to me say Tommy in Ranga. The Bög the Gendang Giju so get and Reji some shoti child. Some of the Reji that pen to go that Chero Jana some the Reji Samba Yeri. Machine the Garsana to Beba, Ando and Rada, the name of the Wizang Meiji to the then Godama trade, sometimes the jacket and a jacket on the long road, then Begeti about Range it and then Petty the young dog.
And we would see a kind of a trend among the Tibetan scholars, especially Tibetan language scholars, for a need for standard Tibetan pronunciation. Because I think this is a pressing issue for a number of reasons. First of all, the need to interact each other outside of your region has become so important. And the other issue is because of a lack of standard pronunciation, and it creates a difficulty in communication between the groups. And then when you have the Chinese as an alternative language, it actually creates a further kind of a threat to the declining of the Tibetan language. And because of this background, a lot of scholars now starting to discuss about the need for a standard pronunciation enabled for the people to understand each other. And because of the need for a standard, the Tibetan, the spoken Tibetan, and there's a debate taking place in Tibetan regions among the Tibetan scholars. And you would see in these debates, some are saying that the Santo pronunciation or the Uke should be the standard spoken language. The other saying it should be the Ando, or the other saying then it should be the Kam. And then a kind of new, I think, ideas emerged. This is because the Tibetan diasporas, or the Tibetans living outside of China, they have a standard spoken language, which would be understood by all the Tibetans living outside of China. And some people think maybe we should use that as a standard language, because that language, is not entirely built on one dialect. It's be perfectly understood between all the regions, and so people think maybe we should adopt to that spoken standard. And then another example, I think closely linked to this argument, was a very well-known professor, the Kirawase, a great master in the Tibetan language and other culture field. And when he taught in Beijing to different students, and his pronunciation is understood by all his students who are coming from different regions. And therefore, some scholars saying, okay, maybe we can use that as a basis to create a new standard common pronunciation. So in relationship to this debate of a common Tibetan language, Trace Foundation, with the support from Trace Foundation, we published a book which titled the collected works on the common language, common Tibetan language. I have been doing the editing work. Trace Foundation supported it. This book has been published. You may see in this book the different views and the discussions on the standard language.
저는 디폴 값이나 시중계의 뇌만의 통치물라지 나오요. 값이나 지동 그지 안가중아 룰로라 저는 뇌만의 중국 지도 생리 강의 미리 신규 강의 열봐. 미리 신규 강의다. 근데 중앙 미리 서라 제목 공원이 되는 미망보지 밀라지제 베리 사퀴다 다 대대 제용들이 베리 지고 말해 되는 미망과 친제들 다제 신주들의 제일 조디다 디난게 딘제부데 슈마나 또 계산 그런 미리 받아 정말 단랑산 가르스나 나오는 대제 사르스지 말해 बाबा
계산 줄미
계산 주면라 뭐야 얘 계산 주면라 그 대지 수요를 봐 너희 강수 다 디게 거기 대지 수요를 대 영나주 개공 때문에 다 고랑이 되게 따로 당 안시신 생년이 위만 건 개발 정보 지역을 미리 신을 강게 공조 대주 나의 공부시 통보시라래 슈마디 통한 선택 근데 나하고 그 대주는 신주자 전부인데 다시 신주자 전부인데 제수요예.
So regarding the government work on the standardization of a Tibetan spoken language, the Chinese government took a lot of I think initiatives and effort toward the standard common language. For example, in 1956, a huge project carried out by the China Academy of Social Science and the China Nationalities University, and they were doing surveys in the Tibetan region for the language survey. And later, they published a book on the result of this book, and at the time, the former professor of Nationalities University, the Kesan Miller, was the editor-in-chief for that, and he published a work on the government survey toward this research. And also the Nationalities, the Research Institute of China, Mr. An Shiqing, he also done extensive work on the standard language, but I haven't seen any of the report so far.
这那你动那个落了，他也掐着吧，你动那个落了，这那个就用也靠所说不，那当然就不这个话，那就也没个从的，那就得决当应该接着吧，这那所说不的那也靠的得这个的，给予无言很高，给予无言很高，公认的那就不要让这种的。别给一个联联委员联行，联联委员联行工作联联这样子，现在搞的是呢，别的这个的所有国的这些恰是的这些联联这工作了。
Another important work the government carried out was in 2005. The Bureau of the China Education Bureau. Of the Education Ministry and the Committee on Language developed a project, and they basically requested the Tibetan Language Affairs Committee in Tibetan Autonomous Region to carry out developing the common Tibetan language. It's now almost like it become the official project.
这个工作委员打工作做得了吧？工作的装修局、演艺局，工作跟研期间，但呢，别的三千万包级的工作，打这就工作，现在直接缺件了，工作跟嘛工作直接，但呢，打种直接缺着，工作打工作给打别的开发，相关饮食在开些的推荐，但呢多安多。 那豫章的协会嘛是吧？那安多啥去的？那四川，那康学，那过来的交接，刚才个来大些新区，给他的清不来。但是对接的怕落接，那工作一样，刚才个来改些对对接的那工作别接这个，等了我比主席是，等待几谁的，别这个等了我比主席是等待几谁的。 So the Language Committee of Tibet Autonomous Region
because of the instruction from the Education Ministry, start doing research for the developing a common language. And at the time, the main person responsible for this work is Mr. Chile Cheta. And what they did was they took an extensive field trips to the different regions, including Amdo camp, and they are conducting a lot of interviews about the need for a common language and some research. And when they came back, they developed a document. And that document or the report was later published, and it's named the Standardizing a Tibetan Common Language, an opinion paper. That's the title of the paper. You didn't show the Jamga. Oh, sorry, this is still the internal document. In 2006, following this report, they organized a seminar on standardizing Tibetan Common Language in Chengdu, Sichuan. During that seminar, over 39 scholars from various regions attended the seminar, and we heard of 40 papers presented. Some scholars were not able to attend, so they basically submitted the paper. And toward the end of that seminar, they kind of came up with some criteria for the developing common language. And the criteria basically says, first of all, the common Tibetan language, or the lingua franca, should be developed based on the Lhasa dialect, Lhasa written dialect. It should be based on the Lhasa written dialect. Secondly, in terms of the written language, the written language, it should be based on the Tibetan grammar. It should be based on the grammar that is refined before. The written common Tibetan language should be based on the Tibetan grammar that was refined around 14th century.